Yeah, please go ahead, Dr. Adinji. We're recording now.
Just a minute. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ICHRRF Symposium on Polycentricity and Indigenous Religious Traditions. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I am the President, Board of Directors, and Chairperson, Board of Director of ICHRRF. I welcome on behalf of ICHRRF all our brothers and sisters from all over the world who are joining us in this symposium. The title of our symposium is Indigenous Religious Traditions and a Polycentric Worldview. So a little bit about International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. ICHRRF is a US-based non-profit organization that is focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on educational, research, legal, and human rights advocacy, and charitable purposes, and strive to be an advocate for human rights and religious freedom of underrepresented communities across the entire world. We believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about the rights of only a specific set of people. A humane and just world necessitates fair treatment of all living human beings. Our focus is on protecting the religious rights of indigenous minorities and communities that nobody wants to speak for. Some of our initiatives include monitoring violations of freedoms and sanctity of freedom of expression of philosophical minorities across the world, research into documentation of the culture, history, and philosophy and difficulties faced by such communities, policy recommendations of human rights and religious diversity and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments. We also have collaborations to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the world with various organizations. Our recent initiative involved presenting a panel discussion in the World Parliament of Religions in October 2021. And recently we established Professor Vednanda Fellowship Training in Human Rights. This is our logo. So welcome to our symposium on Indigenous Religious Traditions and a Polycentric Worldview. We have a number of distinguished speakers that include Professor Vednanda, who will be the opening speaker, Professor Ed Butler, who will give a keynote address, Mrs. Mayan Elder Elizabeth Arujo, High Priestess Mrs. Trinkunian, Mr. Carl Clemens, who is our Executive Director, and Professor Yeshuan Pathak, who is a member of the Board of Directors, ICHRRF. Before bringing our speakers, I will introduce the topic. There is a saying in Upanishads, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Translated into English, That which exists is one. Sages call it by various names. That's the essential message of polycentricity or spiritual belief. In fact, the same quote from Upanishads was invoked by Swami Vivekananda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, in his famous address to the World Parliament of Religions on September 11, 1893, when he addressed that World Parliament of meeting. Why it is important to have a polycentric worldview and promote it? I think what has happened that physical colonization now has been replaced by spiritual and religious colonization. There is intellectual colonization and subjugation of indigenous minorities that demands uniformity all across the world. This situation has led to use of market forces to purchase the loyalties of captive and vulnerable poor populations to a particular chosen sect or religion. On the other hand, various forms of punishments for blasphemy and apostasy, in the most extreme form as death penalty, have been used to control the adherents and stifle the curiosity of the mind. In such an oppressive system, the followers of the indigenous traditions have either been lampooned and ridiculed as pagans, heathens, kafirs, non-believers, and some have been annihilated and killed. So there is a binary worldview of believers versus non-believers, and attempts are made to convert the indigenous vulnerable minorities to one's own point of view. We are in a serious danger of losing ancient traditions, lifestyles, philosophies, and languages. In fact, plurality of humankind has become the sacrificial goat at the altar of a quote-unquote superior sect, superior ideology, superior book, which has been revealed to the chosen one, and no one else. Denial of philosophical diversity and spiritual choices results in the worst kind of oppression of humanity, human mind, and violent subjugation of human spirits. Market forces of globalization, instead of preserving human values, have contributed to the annihilation of local indigenous traditions, cultures, arts and crafts, languages, attires, philosophy, and spiritual and religious thinking. So what has this led to? Monist philosophy and a monocentric worldview takes a position that is my way or highway. I have the monopoly to convert. Evangelism, forced conversions, use of fraud and deception, a very binary view of humanity as believers versus non-believers. Either you are with us or you are against us. If you are with us, everything is fine. If you are non-believers or if you are against us, then you are in trouble. And I think there's a serious problem with that mindset. What are the dangers of monocentric worldview? It has led to, seriously speaking, annihilation of civilizations, ethnic cleansing, cultural extinction. Repeated, genocides and pogroms, atrocities on women and children, and it's sad to say, slavery and sexual exploitation. So this excessive influence on monocentric worldview of spirituality does not help anyone in humankind. And that's why ICHRRF wants to initiate conversation and dialogue on indigenous religious traditions and a polycentric worldview. Before I bring the speakers, there are some housekeeping rules for our audience. I would request everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speakers. Only the members of audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questions, please. Please send your questions through the Q&A function. Please be very specific and precise in asking a question. Please do not send comments in the form of a monologue. A question needs to be a question, not a statement. And lastly, we are recording this session, so it will be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website within 24 hours. And as I said that we have a panel of distinguished speakers. Our opening speaker is Professor Vednanda. I'll give a very brief introduction because he has achieved so much in his lifetime that, a brief introduction does not do any justice to his achievements. Professor Nanda has taught at the University of Denver since 1965. At University of Denver Stern College of Law, he holds the distinction of holding John Evans Distinguished University Professor and Thompson G. Mass Professor of Law, and is the founding director and director emeritus of the International Legal Studies Program. In 1971, Professor Nanda founded the Denver Journal of International Law and Policy, one of the first international law journals in the country. He is also the director of Vednanda Center for International and Comparative Law, launched in his name in 2006 through a generous founding gift from Denver University Law alumni and friends, Doug and Mary Scrivener. Other alumni have since established the Vednanda Professorship in International Law in his honor. He has been involved in global international law community throughout his career. He has been president of multiple numbers of professional associations, advisory councils for United States Institute of Human Rights. He has been a delegate on behalf of United States and vice chair of the Executive Council of World Federation of the United Nations Associations in Geneva, served on board of directors of United Nations Association USA. He has numerous international awards and honors. I'm not going to, recite all of them. In 2018, he received Louis B. Sohn Award for Public International Law from the ABA section of International Law, the Gandhi King Aikida Award for Community Peace Building from Soka Gakkai International and Morehouse College, the World Jurist Association, World Legal Scholar Award, and so on and so forth. In 2017, he was honored by US House of Representatives with Hiroshima Peace Award. He has co-authored more than 25 books in various fields of international law, more than 225 chapters in major law review articles. He's a regular columnist in the Denver Post. He's a frequent contributor in print and electronic media internationally. He's invited to numerous international professional meetings. And we are proud to say that he is a member of the board of directors of ICHRRF He is also the chairperson of International Advisory Board of ICHRRF. And recently, ICHRRF feels very honored to announce starting of Professor Vednanda Fellowship Training Program in Human Rights. We are seeking applications for that Human Rights Fellowship. Professor Vednanda, it's my pleasure to give you the floor, sir. Thank you. Sir, you are muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, Adityanji, for very generous introduction. And I want to say greetings to all who are presently in the audience. Adityanji, you set the stage for our discussion, and I am deeply grateful. Looking at the current situation of the indigenous population, the sad part is that because of this globalization, because of the growing appetite in many countries for resources, you find that indigenous people's lands, their resources, their economic, social, and cultural rights, all of them are under attack. And they suffer at the present time from violence, from massacres, and even genocide. I was just listening yesterday what's happening on climate change conference in Scotland. And Tuvalu, a small state in the Pacific, the delegates said, we are going to be totally inundated unless the international community takes action now. There is no choice for us, but the only choice is going to be relocation. And many of these indigenous peoples, especially in the South Pacific area, there are 10 million of them, and they rely so much on the oceans. Ocean is the one that gives them substance. And that subsistence is at the present time being threatened. Pollution and the sea ocean rising because of climate change, that at the present time is the major problem that they are facing. Many years ago, I taught at the University of Hawaii and working on the Pacific Asian island situations. I visited almost all of these islands. And I found again the same situation, that they are at the present time, many of them, Kiribati and others, thinking about relocation, asking Australia, asking New Zealand to give them opportunity, have some land for them, so that when the need is, that they can go and relocate. Adityanji, you talked about the worldview and the worldview of these people. But before I talk about that, what is the situation today, as I mentioned? Next door to me is Canada. And there they had long ago an Indian Act. And the Indian Act at that time said the term person means an individual other than an Indian. So Indians, they were not persons. And then they changed that act. But I was looking at 1991, Chief Justice gave an opinion. And I want to read one couple sentences. He said, similarly, it would not be accurate to assume that even pre-contact existence in the territory was in the least bit idyllic, talking about their own existence. The plaintiff's ancestors, these are the indigenous people, had no written language, no horses or wheeled vehicles. Slavery and starvation was not uncommon. Wars with neighboring peoples were common. And there is no doubt, to quote Hobbes, that Aboriginal life in the territory was, at best, and let me say that, nasty, brutish, and short. And that is the kind of setting in which Indigenous people have been looked at. When I came to teach here in 1965, since then, I have had the opportunity to work with Indigenous people, took them to Geneva, fighting for their rights, and on this United Nations Declaration for Human Rights, had the opportunity to work on it. Coming to the worldview, as you know, all of you, that it means shared philosophy, beliefs, values, and customs. And that is society's worldview. And that is the interaction of the person and group with the world around them. It includes land, people, animals, everything. And if you think about the worldview of Indigenous people, then I think you will find that, as Adityanji mentioned, it's so different from at the present time when you think about the Western worldview. Let me mention a few items that distinguish them. They are spiritually oriented society. Their system is based on belief and spiritual world. And the Western worldview is scientific, skeptical, requiring proof as a basis of belief. I think for them, as many of you again know, the land is sacred, usually given by a creator or supreme being. And the Western worldview is land, its resources, they should be available for development and extraction. And the focus here is benefit of the humans. And I can mention many of those things, but a couple more, that the equality and quality of relationship with people is where the worldview of Indigenous people is. They feel comfortable with it. But here the worldview is that you are successful, you are achieving your goals, and that is how it's considered to be important. Human beings are most important in the world for Indigenous people. And when you think about our own worldview in the West, it is again, get wealth, be rich, and it's good for the community and for yourself. I had the opportunity when I was teaching in Hawaii, as I mentioned, to be working with people who were fighting for their own rights, the original Hawaiian people. And at that time, I learned from them, sat with them about how they deal with challenges and problems when there is no peace in the community. And what are their conflict resolution practices? And then I was teaching in South Africa, in the Cape, and there also I learned about the African conflict resolution practices. Now, what is the common feature among all of them? Common feature is focus on humanism, focus on shared humanity. And if I have to look at the elements, and as I look at their own peacekeeping setting, and that is true about North America, it's true about Africa, it's true about South Pacific. So let me very briefly mention to you that their focus is in peacemaking, that they are interactive. They are not adversarial. They believe in dialogue. They seek to mend and seek to reinstate. We have learned now about restorative justice. These people from the very beginning have done restorative justice, and they are facilitating dialogue. They want to determine the truth. What really happens is that they would bring the entire community together. The person who is a complainant presents his case. They sit in a circle. The person who is going to be their eldest elder, she or he is going to be taking care of the narrative. They believe in spiritual beliefs, oath taking, swearing. And then they also, what they do is that they would talk about the challenge, why it happened, what complaint is there, listen to both sides. Then the community would also have their own say on that particular issue. And eventually, what they would do is that they would find a successful way of resolving that conflict. They would shake hands, they will hug each other, they would share meals, and then that is how they try to get that done. In South Africa, they called it Ubuntu. And as I look at today's problems that they face and how at least some effort, for example, in Europe, in Latin America, is being made in order to see that their rights are restored. And I think I'm deeply grateful, Adityanji, for your organization, this commission, in order to make sure that their rights are preserved, their rights are protected, their rights are promoted, and their rights are the ones that we want to put on the forefront in the international community as its agenda. So I want to stop here, and later on I might be able to say a few words in questions, answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Vednanda, for that lucid presentation about the problems faced by indigenous communities and the Western worldview of these indigenous communities. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. Our audience will write their questions in the chat function. I will bring our next speaker, who's the keynote speaker, Professor Ed Butler. Professor Ed Butler received his PhD in philosophy from the New School of Social Research in 2004 for his dissertation, The Metaphysics of Polytheism in Proclus. Professor Ed Butler specializes in ancient Greco-Roman philosophy, particularly Platonism and Neoplatonism, along with expertise in polytheistic thought and philosophies. He has taught at the New School and Montclair State University and is also a visiting professor at the Hindu University of America in Orlando, US. He has published in more than a dozen academic journals, including Dionysius, Methexis, and Epoch. He is an associate editor at Walking the Words, a biannual journal of polytheism and spirit work, and the General Socrates. He has his own website called Henodology, Philosophy, and Theology, where many of his publications are available to our audience. And that also features his online theological encyclopedia of the goddesses and gods of the ancient Egyptians. He is a scholar, a university professor, a teacher who passionately believes in polycentric worldview and polytheism. So without further ado, I give the floor to Professor Edward Butler. Professor Ed Butler, please. I think Professor Butler is on mute. Or you want to contact Professor Butler?
Yeah, let me see. Professor Edward Butler, you're right now muted. I'm going to request an unmute.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Am I, is my audio good?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom for hosting this event and for inviting me to speak. I'm the director of the new Center for Global Polytheist and Indigenous Traditions at Indic Academy. My life's work and the mission of the center is the study of polytheism and of polytheistic traditions and advocacy on behalf of polytheism, its intellectual integrity and its beauty, against widespread misunderstanding and distortion. By every reasonable historical account, polytheism was the default religious orientation of the entire world until the spread of Christianity less than 2 millennia ago. Conversion was far from peaceful. Christianity and Islam explicitly and vigorously denounce polytheism and have eradicated countless other traditions purely because they worshipped many gods and different gods, and every surviving polytheistic tradition is critically endangered in this global context, even where it may be locally dominant. These traditions are at risk as well from an atheism which shares with monotheism an antipathy toward polytheism and which has inherited from monotheism many of its privileges and prerogatives in secular contexts. The Center seeks to support polytheistic traditions, which honor the divinity in all beings and the inexhaustible multiplicity of the divine, whether those traditions exist today in unbroken continuity or are being revived after interruptions of centuries, seeking to help practitioners to tend their legacies and foster creativity within them, as well as in interpreting them for outsiders. Ours is not the disinterested study of traditions consigned to the Museum of History, but the establishment of networks of reciprocal aid among them, to help them confront the human rights issues that specifically affect them and which cannot be addressed in interfaith settings which fail to acknowledge the power relations between the globally hegemonic monotheist traditions and those which have been targeted by them for elimination in every part of the world. We seek to understand the intersectional nature of the monotheist project with colonialism, white supremacy, and other forms of domination. We recognize the distortions these traditions have suffered from Western scholarship as well, and therefore seek to promote interdisciplinary and innovative research methods and paradigms, including affirming the inherent value of direct experience of the gods, spirits, and divine forces, both in antiquity and today. It is a trait of humans everywhere and at every time in history to experience contact with incorporeal beings who live on a far wider scale than ourselves, and who can be contacted again and again over the course of generations, seemingly without end. The common trait of those traditions we call polytheistic is to sustain and preserve the relationship with such beings, and to accumulate these relationships, so that as we encounter these traditions, we find that they hold religious regard for many such beings. Virtually all of the world's indigenous traditions are descriptively polytheistic. That is, they have many objects of religious regard, with different names and depictions. They may well have, in addition, ideas about an ultimate reality, such as Brahman in Hinduism, or the Tao in Taoism, or regarding some hierarchical disposition among these beings. But whatever these ideas may be, they have not prevented these traditions from accumulating a rich body of relationships with a number of divinities, a number, moreover, which has typically grown over time, even as some divinities may become the focus of more intense attention and others become more peripheral. It's this characteristic about which I wish to speak in particular, namely the perspectival nature of polytheism, in which, at different times or for different worshippers, different gods occupy the metaphorical center, while others are at the periphery, while still being recognized and respected. This property of polytheism has accordingly been termed polycentricity, precisely because polytheistic systems recognize this mobile center, a center, as it were, which is everywhere, and thus is not fixed on a single deity to the rejection of others. Polytheism's model a kind of deep or radical pluralism, which I wish to argue is crucial to the possibility for human and ecological flourishing. This pluralism has been persistently distorted and devalued by modern academic interpreters, who cannot help but impose upon it their monotheistic assumptions. For them, therefore, this plurality is a merely contingent variation upon a more fundamental unity. We are familiar with the metaphors, many roots up the same mountain, or the blind men groping at different parts of the same elephant. But the eyes of devotees are not blind. Rather, if we are going to be true to their own experience and not impose an alienating perspective upon it, we shall find that for the most intense devotees of a given deity, in every tradition well enough documented, that deity is absolute, without for that rejecting others, but rather pushing them to the periphery, whether for the length of a ritual, or for the span of a hymn, or for the lifetime of the devotee or a devotional community. It's not a question for the devotee of their deity merely representing an absolute. If the multiplicity of such absolutes causes a problem for our understanding, it is precisely our problem, and it is up to us to find the intellectual structures requisite to understanding these theophanies without distortion. The existence of doctrines within these traditions, respecting an ultimate reality, a single fabric of existence, was clearly not intended, when taken in their full context, to demote or to displace the actual objects of worship. And so we do not do justice to those doctrines by using them as an intellectual crutch to make this plurality disappear. We need to be aware that these doctrines have been weaponized in the discourse of international scholarship, conducted in hegemonic languages and with the support of hegemonic institutions, in order to undermine the divine relationships, which are the treasures of these traditions. This is a crucial issue in the historical reception of these doctrines, which requires extensive and painstaking critique in order to restore to them their proper meaning in their original indigenous context. Fortunately, there are intellectual frameworks available for understanding polycentric multiplicity without flattening it into a multiplicity subordinate to a fixed singularity. Indeed, I believe that if we approach them correctly, all of these traditions do, in diverse fashions, articulate this fundamental polycentricity. But to recognize this requires a sustained critique of monotheistic interpretations which have been imposed upon them by outsiders, and which are all too often echoed by practitioners themselves when they're attempting, with only the best intentions, to navigate an international discourse about religion which is dominated by monotheist assumptions. My own work has focused in particular upon reclaiming the doctrine of radical polycentric polytheism embodied in ancient Platonism, a tradition of thought which, while it lies at the heart of the European philosophical tradition, is in important respects scarcely understood today in its true significance. For the polytheistic Platonists of late antiquity, who stood in militant resistance to Christian hegemony, the first principle, the one itself, was nothing like the one God of the monotheists, whom Plotinus criticized for having, quote, contracted the divine into one, unquote. Rather, It was the pure principle of individuation, source of all things, without itself being anything at all. Plato, in his all-important dialogue, the Parmenides, explains that the one neither is nor is one. This is not to be understood as so-called negative theology, as monotheists have termed it in their effort to appropriate Platonism for their own purposes. Instead, it is an explicit and rational doctrine, which is unpacked by successive generations of ancient Platonists into a theoretical expression of something fundamental to polytheistic practice, namely that all the gods are present in each one. This presence of all in each, as opposed to all in one, which is a completely different concept, articulates the polycentricity of polytheistic praxis in a manner which is true at once to the devotee's experience of their deity as absolute and to the demands of the most advanced metaphysics. In the wake, however, of the closure of the Platonic academies by legislation forbidding non-Christians from public teaching, the true significance of the Platonic doctrine of the One was utterly obscured, and the Platonic principle of individuation, a principle of uniqueness and radical plurality, was effectively transformed into its complete opposite, becoming a mere cipher for the monotheist God, a supreme being, when it had never been any sort of being at all. Not only did this turn into a symbol of monotheism, that which had instead secured the intelligibility of polytheism, it also made the key element of the entire philosophical system of Platonism systematically otiose, a redundant expression of the unity of being. It was my own vivid experience of coming to understand the combined effects of this theological appropriation and philosophical erasure of the ancient history of the West itself, which primed me to recognize virtually the exact same procedure being carried out again and again in more recent times, as Westerners, with their monotheist presuppositions and frequently explicit Christian commitments, encountered foreign civilizations with unbroken polytheistic traditions, as well as ancient and sophisticated doctrines of being. Whatever in them could serve as a prefiguration of the one God, specifically any kind of monism, or any singular principle which could be reified and treated as a theological figurehead, was transposed from a philosophical into a theological register, simultaneously undermining the indigenous polytheism and devitalizing these civilizations' philosophical legacies, which were now treated as theological projects that laid the intellectual groundwork for conversion. Recovering the understanding which made these philosophical projects compatible with, and indeed supportive of millennia of unbroken polytheistic practice, is therefore also indispensable to restoring their full participation in a multipolar, international philosophical dialogue. Polycentricity also has a valuable contribution to make to human rights and human dignity. People have the right to live in a cosmos ordered according to principles they recognize. Universality needs to emerge from within such a worldview and be worked out in real time, in real dialogue, and not presupposed as the real, of which worldviews and perspectives are mere representations, lesser truths, or benevolent falsehoods. Instead of treating perspectives as perspectives on the totality, it urges us to recognize totality as primarily composed of perspectives as its proper units. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Butler. What an exquisite intellectual review of the problems faced by polytheism as well as polycentric worldview, the historical and the intellectual underpinnings of the struggle the polytheistic communities face. We are honored to have you, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a number of questions, but we will take the questions at the end. I thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of ICHRRF that you were able to take some precious time off your hard academic and teaching schedule. So we feel very honored that you joined us, and we hope that you will continue to be part of ICHRRF intellectual efforts. So we will move on to the next speaker. We will take questions to Professor Butler in the end. Our next speaker is High Priestess Inia Trinkunian. She is a Lithuanian ethnologist, folklorist, sociologist, psychologist. She is head of a folk music group called Kulgrinda. And as I said, that she's the high priestess of the Remuva community and religion, which is a very old pre-Christian Lithuanian faith. She became the high priestess of the Remuva community in Lithuania after the sad death of her previous high priest, who was her husband Jonas Trinkunian, in 2014. She is also a founding member of the European Congress of Ethnic Religions, an organization for cooperation among associations that promote the ethnic religions of Europe. The primary goal of the ICHRRF is the strengthening of pre-Christian religious traditions of the Europe, emphasizing and fostering their ties with neo-pagan movements. She holds a master's degree in psychology from Vilnius University. She was a featured speaker at the Indigenous plenary session at the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto in 2015, and she was also participant in our panel discussion in World Parliament of Religions in 2021. So without further ado, I invite Mrs. Inia Trinkunian for her talk on Remuva traditions. Inia, you are having any difficulty?
Inia, please unmute yourself. Check your PC. I just sent you an unmute request. You can respond to that.
Is it okay now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me for to such a important event, and for me it's a great honor and great pleasure to participate here and to listen to such a wonderful presentations. And now I'd like to share my PowerPoint presentation. Actually, yes. So share. So now I can start. So I'd like to speak about Remuva tradition and its treatment of diversity of faith. I think that it's very important in our days world. So, and starting my presentation, I once again need to say that Lithuania was the last country in Europe to be Christianized. And nowadays, we are proud to claim this, that we are the last to be Christianized. And so we resisted for Christian aggression, but we are constrained to accept Christianity in 1387 politically for surviving. The indigenous Lithuanian religion did not die. It was kept alive by farmers and country villages who maintained their old ways, even under Christianity and the Soviet rule. And young people from the cities, including myself, traveled to the countryside to learn directly from the old people their ancestral traditions. And here you can see old photo from 1967, where my late husband, they are lighting the fire during summer solstice presentation. Attempts to revival Roma's religion started in 19th century, and contemporary Roma movement started its activities in 1967. It was in Soviet times, so therefore it was suppressed by Soviets in 1971 and was persecuted. All the rituals we have made, all the festivals we celebrated, it was underground activities, and it wasn't allowed by Soviets. So only when we got independence, we had possibility to register our religious community, and it happened in 1992, when Lithuania became independent. So indigenous Lithuanian religion community Roma continues these spiritual traditions of ancestors. The source of Lithuanian religion is the living, uninterrupted, unwritten tradition of spiritual practice. And we have manifestations of it in the old songs, tales, legends, customs, and other heritage of our ancestors. Our opponents and our enemies often say that your religion has died centuries ago, but we are still alive. We celebrate calendar, family, and personal holidays. We conduct our rituals at either domestic or public sacred places. And this is a photo from our spring best green grass celebration. Now I want to say some words about Roma tradition and its treatment of diversity of faith. So polycentric worldview means ability to perceive yourself being the center of the world. And the indigenous traditions perceive the world to be or exist now and here. Polycentric world is the world of free people. Monocentric world, we can say that, is the world of slaves. We are speaking, talking, and singing to our gods and ancestors our native language. We and our gods are born here. Our gods live in our native hills, rivers, and springs, and form the center of my universe. Sometimes I recognize voices of our conquerors speaking to us. You don't exist. You are dead. We have killed or converted you hundreds of years ago. We respond. We are alive. We are chanting, praying the same gods, worshipping the sacred fire as our ancestors did. The oak trees in our shrines sprouted from the acorns of the sacred oak tree they cut down hundreds of years before. Roma says, every tradition has its rights to follow its own way, including gods, goddesses, ways of honoring gods and ancestors. We are different. We originated from the different ground, different seeds, and got different amount of sunlight and rain. And the diversity is the most marvelous characteristic of a person, religion, ethnic group, and nation. Now I want to share the basic rule of Roma, which we called Dharna or harmony. It allows us to be this principle. It allows us to be in harmony with ourselves and in harmony with others, other traditions, religions, and nations. Dharna, the rule of harmony, has always been of significance in the ancient faith. The world is harmonious, but this harmony isn't regular. It sometimes weakens and disappears. Therefore, it is important to hold on to it, to create and expand it. A person's duty is to reach for harmony, to protect it. Harmony, or Dharna, is the basis of our ancient culture and religion. I am standing in the circle, the very center of the world, astonished and proud of the possibility, be with my family, religion, and culture, and admiring everyone who follows his own way. So maybe then I'd like to say just a few words about other European traditions. As there are a lot of native religious believers and organizations in all Europe. In all Europe, in every country, you can meet people following ancient ways, ancient traditions. And I just want to say that in 1998, Roma was first who started uniting ancient believers of Europe, and we found the World Congress of Ethnic Religions, which nowadays we name European Congress of Ethnic Religions. There are groups both in East Europe and in West Europe, and we're making congresses, conferences every second year. And so we are following the ancient ways. Now, regarding our day's matches, so I just wanted to share our last experience, just to say that until today, just Abrahamic religions in Lithuania has been recognized as traditional religious communities. And even if Roma complies with all requirements stated in the law, there was a huge backlash from Catholic Church regards the state recognition of our community. So, as I said, as I said, so we are registered, but in Lithuania, there is division of religious into three categories, and Romuva is concerned to be in the lowest category. That means it is religions that are named not traditional and not recognized by state. They are registered, but not traditional and not recognized by state. So we applied for the second level to be not traditional but recognized by state. For this, we needed to be registered for 25 years. So we did it. But as I said, the Parliament voted against recognition of Romuva. So this led us to sue Lithuania to European Court of Human Rights. And Strasbourg, the European Court of Human Rights, has ruled that Lithuania has violated the human rights of Romuva by not recognizing the religion. And there are some points they said about it. So that existence of a majority or historical predominant religion cannot justify discrimination against minority religious group, and opposition of an authority of that religion could constitute objective and reasonable justification for refusing state recognition to the applicant association. And the members of the Seimas who voted against the granting of state recognition did not remain neutral and impartial in exercising their regulatory powers. And true religious pluralism is vital to the survival of a democratic society. So this is the last slide of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I am waiting for questions at the end of the session.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Nia Trinkunian, the High Priestess of Romuva religion, for educating about your faith and the struggles you and your fellow spiritualists have faced in Europe in 21st century. I can assure you on the behalf of the Commission that we will support you in your quest to get full recognition for the Romuva religion in Lithuania and in Europe to its fullest possible way. We will have questions for you towards the end when all the speakers have spoken. I must say that it was an honor to have you come and explain the Romuva religion to our audience in a very clear and lucid way. So thank you once again for your presence here and participating. We will have questions later on. I bring the next speaker, and our next speaker is Mayan elder Mrs. Elizabeth Arujo. Mrs. Elizabeth Arujo is based in Guatemala and has developed a lifetime to preserving, documenting, and propagating the ancient Mayan traditions and language. She has witnessed in her own life the continuing persecution of the practicing Mayans. She documents and propagates the history, the medieval invasions, current challenges, and opportunities for positive change of the Mayan traditions. She remains brightly optimistic about the future and considers the world to be undergoing a transition to a new, more harmonious culture that nurtures understanding between human groups and fosters a respect for nature. So we have Mayan elder Mrs. Elizabeth Arujo. Welcome, Mrs. Arujo. The floor is yours.
Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can see you all.
Could you adjust your camera so we can see your face? It's lower than your face right now.
I'm in a cell phone. Maybe if I'm.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Yeah, almost. Actually, no, that makes it horizontal. Actually, if you can just make it vertical again. Yeah, the picture is sort of on its side right now. Just yeah, that's better.
I couldn't connect to the iPad.
Okay.
If you can keep the phone at a little distance from you, then we will be able to see your face. Yes, now we can. Yeah.
Maybe if I hold it.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect.
See if I can hold it. Okay. Now I feel like my hands are tied. Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction, a generous introduction. I'm just a simple person trying to see a better world, especially for our children. And I feel like I would like to talk about the origin of the Mayans according to the oral tradition. And our elders, they say that the Mayans lived in Atlantis. And one day they receive a message. They say, leave this place. Go away, find another place, just leave. And the person who were the obedient was the one who listened to this message. They got in their boats and an exodus started. They traveled to finally arriving in the land of in Tulum. At that time, it was named Tulam, and they settled there. And then later, they found soon after they found another. They heard another message saying, "Find refuge." And the earth, they found these caves in the earth, and they went into the caves, and they live underground for a certain period of time. What happened is outside, what happened, it has been the deluge, the great floods, but they were safe underground in the heart of Mother Earth. There they travel through underground, through tunnels, and they reach different parts of the continent. I was in Bolivia once, and an elder told me they came from Atlantis, and I asked him also, how so? And he said, because Atlantis was a form of maybe between 8 or 13 different islands, and people got the same message, but they left to different parts of the world. He says, so we come from there. And so this was a similarity of what the elders here had said. And they all, when it was time, when the waters receded, they all came out to the surface, and they settled in their places, and they their new they developed their customs and their way of being. But we all are from Alaska to the Tierra del Fuego. It's just one civilization within the diversity of these different groups. There are major groups that, like in South America, we had the Incas, we had the Aymaras, the Quechuas, And here in Central America, maybe the Mayans, and then we have the indigenous people in North America. There is a word that now is becoming very strong, and is to call, to say Abiyala. And Abiyala is referring to all indigenous people of the continent, because the name America, it was given by the Europeans in honor to a European person, a cartographer, that was Americo Vespuccio. He was the one that made the first map of the continent. So this word is taking place again to find strengthen the roots and to find solidarity among all the different indigenous groups of the continent. Just recently, I came across a documentary. It was by the National Geographic, and it was about a center in Colombia. It's called San Agustin. This is a site where there are many stone sculptures. I don't know if you have heard about it already, because among these sculptures, there were some very different, that they were not from here. Like one has the image of an elephant, and there were no elephants in this continent. And so they they brought a person, his name Pravin Mohan, and he talked about these different sculptures, and he said that they were from India. And one of them was about Ganesh, and they have Shiva, and they have the Lingas and the Nagas. And I found that very interesting. Or some Olmec heads, that those are mainly from Mexico. Now we have here in, another thing is that they show the map, and they show how this site is, the topography of the site, exactly like one of the places in southern India, where they have a temple with all these figures also. Now, we have a place here across the border from Guatemala in Honduras. It's called Kopang. And in Kopang, there are many, many sculptures also. And this is a center that was an astronomical center. It's where they did studies of mathematics and astronomy, and they were the calendars there. And it was a center where people would convene from time to time. So my elders have told me that at that time, people could travel in their vimanas. In a very short time, they would move from place to place and share information. And so we have in this place of Kopang, we have images of people from Africa, from Asia, and that was proving that they say that when, like we do now, that when we go to a reunion or something, people are signing, leaving their signature. For them at this time, this was the way of live in their image. It was like their signature to leave their image or image of their culture. And what I want to say is that among all this diversity, there is a connection and there is a unity. When I was in Mount Abu, I saw at a temple in Mount Abu, in a courtyard between two buildings, there is a wall with a depiction of a Maya scenery, and it's carved in the wall. And I found that very, very interesting. Also in India, I have found many similarities For instance, in Shillong, the traditional clothes for the men, they were very, very similar to the ones they were in Chichicastenango here in Guatemala. Also, there was a festival going on, and the elder did a reading for the community, an egg reading. And we do the egg readings here in a different way because each one has their own ways. But it's that the knowledge comes from a higher source. We believe that we have only one creator for all with different names, but it's one. We don't consider ourselves to be monopolists. Because we believe that is only one, the higher source, the Great Spirit, or Allah, or God, or we call it Ahau. And we all are under, the laws of our Creator, and are connected through the fire, connected through the water, connected to through the air, and we all are living in one planet. That's why we say we all are brothers and sisters, because we have only one Father, one Creator. And they left, we are under the laws of our Creator, and these laws of our Creator are the same ones for everybody. It's what we call the constitutionary rights or the natural law, and that is to have respect for God, respect for the earth, respect for everything, all forms of living. That we are the ones to take care of the animals, take care of the trees, take care of the earth. We are guardians of the earth, connected by these laws. And this is, the differences are because the elders, they say, and this is oral tradition again, that God created their children in different parts of the world and gave them the seed for each one to co-create their own way of living. And these are the differences between one and another groups. But above that, it's only one matrix, one higher knowledge. The essence comes from up above. And we are, like I said, we are all united by that laws, and it says to have respect for one another. Now that respect was in these days it has been lost because the education in the schools is a Western way of educating. They educate you to make money. Spiritual education is not important for them anymore because that doesn't make money. Now they say that the indigenous people are savages, they are ignorant, and they are, that they don't know anything, that they are even violent people. But if you see, the indigenous people have never created any big wars, world wars. They have always respected the earth, and that's what they say, that they are stop the growth of the country. And there's a way how they the strategies that they used was to take the original language of the people and to leave them mute. That way, if they lost their language, they feel lost. They wanted to erase also all the past, the history, and to forbid them to practice their spirituality. We have seen this in recent times, with what happened finding those children in the schools of Canada, and here in Guatemala too. It's been happening in different ways, like disguised ways to do it, but they take away what is ours, and then they say that we are the invaders. And one thing that worries me very much is the eco prisoners, because I see here in Guatemala, there are several elders and people of wisdom, men and women, who are in jail for trying to defend their rights and to protect Mother Earth. I think that taking care of the Mother Earth is a spiritual obligation, and but the foreign way of being is like destroying Mother Earth, and we are going through this period of change, and there is a human evolution happening, and the doors have been opened, and I see there is much hope in the youth these days. We have to, to support the youth, and I think they are the ones that will change the world. And I think, I don't know if my time is up or if I have any more time.
You can have a couple of minutes if you wish.
Okay. It's another thing that has happened, and I have seen it not only here, but in this is worldwide. How these people, they go to other countries and they appropriate what we call cultural appropriation, and it's just to make money. For instance, in India, I can see I love the yoga. We don't. But here, the yoga studios are to make money. It's pure exploitation of something that is very sacred, as I see it. They use, with the Native Americans, they took the sweat lodges, which is a part to how to do their spiritual practice in a sweat lodge, and they became like money makers. And we had that example a few years ago when that person, I forgot that 3 people died because he didn't know exactly how to do it, and people suffocated inside. And they were charging, I believe it was $10,000 for the week to come there. And with the Mayans, they had taken like the calendar to make a business. They make a business of the 2012. Even they make movies about it. And they go to South America and they try to take the composition of their medicinal plants, and then they patent them, and so it's stealing all this knowledge or this wisdom of the native people. Also, they are doing it with in the clothing, the textiles, the symbols. They take the symbols and they use them for, to make other things to sell, but the thing is that they patent those things, and now the original people, they cannot even, they lose it because sometimes they are forbidden to use that. And so I think there is hope. We are COVID, the COVID-19 has brought a lot of information, or like, for instance, we see that there is no borders. COVID doesn't recognize borders, and COVID doesn't recognize any races or rich people or people. It just can affect to anyone. And these are things that how life is in its natural way. And Also, it shows that fear of losing a job or losing money, losing their homes, fear of death, fear of the unknown. But at the same time, for other people, it's a wake-up call. For other people, it's a way to strengthen your spiritual ways. It makes you more with compassion and more human. So that's what I think that I can share at this moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Elder Elizabeth. At one point in time, I thought what you were describing, that was me. I am a Mayan. There's so much, similarity in some of these ancient traditions. There is a unity in diversity. And I felt that I was just a Mayan tradition person, the way you described it. So thank you for educating us. And we hope that you will continue to come to our various meetings and forums in future as well. Please stick around for the questions and answers.
Yeah, I thank you all. Thank you for these programs that are very wonderful and very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Okay. So we move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Carl Clemens, who is the Executive Director of the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedoms. Carl has contributed as an author to articles and books on various subjects at the intersection of public policy, information technology, and contemporary and historical religious or ideological currents in the society. He has studied and immersed in several religious traditions. He has co-authored a book on language and education policy focusing on history of discriminatory language policies in India, the United States, Iran, and China. Carl has advocated for a fair narrative on the past and present turmoil surrounding the Sikh and Baloch communities in South Asia, and has helped compile and analyze statistics on human rights violations in that region. Professionally, he works in the field of information technology and is a student of Persian and classical Sanskrit languages, and also a teacher of Sanskrit language. I must say that Carl is one of the pillars of ICHRRF. Without his contribution, the day-to-day work of ICHRRF is just not possible. And I'm highly thankful to him for his volunteerism. And now I, give the floor to Carl. He will be speaking on the US scene, the problems we are having in US as far as accepting polycentric worldview is concerned. Mr. Carl Clemens, please.
Thank you, Doc. So recently, the US EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they laid out new guidelines that allow pagan Americans to request leave for festivals like the solstice celebrations. So this is among the few recent positive developments for a set of religious traditions here, polycentric religious traditions, that sort of have to live in an environment that is otherwise flush with discrimination, defamation, and even active harassment. So there's a variety of these polytheistic traditions, ranging from the Native American, Hawaiian, and the so-called neo-pagan, or what should just be called pagan traditions with roots in Europe, that is seeing a sort of a revival here in the United States as well. It's still behind what it is in Europe, but there is an increase here in America, and I wanted to focus more on this pagan community that's called pagan, for various reasons. Firstly, some of the other traditions, they've sort of managed to define themselves separately. Legally, they seem to be in decent shape, and they have at least their own little areas in which they can kind of live peacefully and openly express their religious identity. Whereas here with the pagan community, there is no racial difference from the majority. Many of them tend to be white, and the focus here is basically just on their religious identity. So I wanted to pick on this one and then see how it, how it's evolving over the last few decades and which direction it's heading in. So in America today, religiously motivated hate crimes make up about 1/5 of all hate crimes committed, according to the Department of Justice. So these hate crimes include even serious offenses like violent attacks, vandalism, and threats, amongst other things. In 1985, there was something called the Satanic Panic. Pagans would know what this is, where pagans in the United States were regularly confronted at work or in the communities that they lived in, and they were confronted not in any sense of having a dialogue, but just sort of warned about the aberrant path that they had chosen. So since that time of widespread and open and active demonization and persecution of paganism in the United States, many pagan civil rights organizations have cropped up, such as Triple L, Lady Liberty League, and they've been trying to come to the aid of pagans facing prejudice, facing discrimination, facing harassment and defamation. But this only happens when the victims actually speak up, which in the vast majority of cases doesn't happen, and we'll see why that's the case. So Triple L, they say that the majority of the complaints that they receive are related to child custody issues, business, zoning laws, housing, and job discrimination. So with child custody, for instance, say there's an ugly divorce, or one of the parents accuses the other parent of being, say, a Wiccan, or even not even being a Wiccan, having some belief that is remotely related to paganism. Maybe the person believes in divination, for instance, or something like that. And that becomes the basis for denying them child custody. So that's just one example of the kind of discrimination that pagans or anybody harking to any value or belief remotely related to paganism, that's the kind of thing that they face. So Reverend Selena Fox, who is the executive director of Triple L, she says that there has been a noticeable uptick in discrimination over the past 4 years. It wasn't clear to me whether this is because there are actually more incidents of discrimination right now, or whether just more people are coming forward to talk about it. I sincerely hope it's the latter, because of reasons that I'll just talk about in a minute. So one example, I'll typically just give a couple of examples here. Typical example of harassment that pagans face. So just this April 2021, there was a case in the Pennsylvania federal court where a lady who was an employee at Panera Bread, she filed a case over job discrimination and harassment. She was regularly harassed by her boss and her co-workers. They told her they would cut her hours, and when she said why, they said that she needed to take the time off to find God. They told her that because of her pagan beliefs, she would be going to hell, and so forth, until finally she was fired, and so she decided to sue, and she approached the Lady Liberty League, and they've been taking up her case. Such cases are extremely common. If you even Google the cases that are reported in the media, there's many, many, many of them. And the fact is that surveys have shown that there are many, many, many times more cases that go unreported. I'll give you another case. In this case, a government body, in this case, the police force, which also discriminated against pagans. So there was a famous case in 1994 in Tennessee, where 3 little children were murdered in a very gruesome fashion. And immediately the local community said that this must be a satanic ritual. And they pointed fingers to this one teenager in the local community who was, he was a goth, and he was also a Wiccan. The two, by the way, are not, they're not concomitant. There's no relation between the two, but in this case, he was both. So it's interesting that the police, when they assigned a case number to this case file, the case number was, and I have it noted down here, 93-05-0666. They actually put 666 down there because in Christianity, that's the number of Satan. And immediately, their first action on the case was to arrest this kid, this teenager, and interrogate him. Now, this kid had a history of fighting depression, and so he had some behavioral issues. However, in court, the crux of their case was that he was a believer in Wicca. So he was, which they translated as witchcraft, you know. And that was actually the basis of pinning the blame on him. That since he was a Wiccan, surely he is there's a high probability that he's into child sacrifice, and then he must have committed the crime. The teenager's name was Damien Eccles, and they pointed out a book on Wicca that they found in his room, and copious notes and diaries written by him about his faith in Wicca. But the fact is that book is actually a very good book. It's a very good introduction to Wicca, and if they had only read it, they would have understood that Wiccans typically tend to be very non-violent. They wish no harm on others, not just human beings, but even animals and plants and the environment and rivers. Very non-violent kind of religion. There's nothing about child sacrifice in there. And they also tend to believe that anything that you do, positive or negative, comes back to you threefold. Sort of a belief in karma of sorts. So Damien Eccles, his notes talk about how he doesn't believe that there's a god, but he believes that there's a goddess. He talked about how his mentors are a coven of witches that he's in touch with over the internet. He talked about aspiring to grow so that he can see the divine light. That was all his notes were about. And yet, that formed this, and he had to, and time and again in court, he had to say that he does not believe in, he's not a Satanist, and he didn't believe in human sacrifice. In spite of that, the case rested on his belief in Wicca, and he was ultimately sentenced to death. And it was only recently that he was released after years of arbitration. He was arrested when he was 18, and only just recently he's been released from prison. That's an example of the kind of widespread misconceptions about these polytheistic pagan traditions and how they result in actual discrimination of a very serious kind. Now, one of the reasons for this is popular culture. In popular culture here in America, by the way, belated happy Thanksgiving happy Halloween to everybody. But popular culture over here depicts witchcraft and paganism as a very dark kind of culture. And it's a big source of the symbolic and cultural annihilation of this religious culture, which mainly focuses on personal growth and on building a community locally. The Wiccan Rede, which is like their credo, it emphasizes non-violence and a sort of a karmic worldview. And similarly, paganism also gets conflated not just with Satanism, but also with the Gothic subculture. In some cases, some pagans also tend to be ethno-nationalists, so there's that as well. So it's basically mixed up with a lot of other things that are actually unrelated to paganism per se. Popular culture portrays them as indulging in bloody animal sacrifices. Not long ago, say a few decades ago, if you look at Indiana Jones, they portrayed Hindus as being these weird people who eat live worms and engage in sacrifices of all kinds. So it's not, and there's a billion Hindus out there. It's not even like a fringe tradition. So paganism is characterized as believing in human sacrifice, including killing babies, or at the most innocuous level, it's portrayed as a set of superstitious chants and spells, invoking ghostly forces. So in all of this popular culture, of course, you might have a rock star who bites off the head of a bird on stage and says he's a follower of Aleister Crowley. That's one part of it, but the root goes to Abrahamic religions that foster these stereotypes. In fact, there were surveys done in 2016, as recently as 2016, where a lot of non-pagans who had these ideas about paganism, they said that they got their information from the Bible. They consider that an authoritative source on what pagan and paganism means, and they link it directly to Satanism. And the Bible has very strict injunctions against pagans. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, in Exodus, for instance. What's really ironic here is that people belonging to Abrahamic religions often tended to think of pagans as being people who are likely to persecute them as Christians or as Muslims or even Jews. In other words, they feared that pagans were out to get them, either through their incantations or even physically as terrorists. Some pagans who were harassed at the workplace were often asked and investigated. Are you a terrorist? Since you belong to this pagan cult, are you a terrorist? Are you going to blow this place up? Are you going to and things like that. So it's kind of ironic that Christians here in America tend to think of pagans as being aggressive people who are out to harm Christians, whereas surveys of pagans said that they had little or no antipathy towards Christianity. It was insignificant in their worldview, and they just had their own walk of faith that they were quite happy with. So an example was that in New York there was a nursing home aide whose co-workers and his bosses, they were harassing him over his belief in Wicca. He was wearing a pendant. So others were wearing crucifixes, which was allowed by the workplace, but he was asked to cover up his pendant. And his company wanted to sue him for Satanism and, I quote, hate crime against Christianity. In other words, in their view, being a Wiccan meant that he was indulging in a hate crime against Christianity. It's kind of ironic. And finally, he was fired for that. And again, this came to light only because he decided to get back and he filed a $10 million lawsuit. And so it kind of made its way to the media. But otherwise, these things don't get covered. So another popular stereotype is that pagans are just weirdos or social dropouts, or they're on the fringe. And this is because some of the more visible pagans are also part of other subcultures, like I mentioned, the Goths, or they dress in ways that are kind of unconventional, and so they tend to get characterized that paganism itself is just a weird kind of subculture, whereas vast majority of pagans look and dress and talk and walk and do things just like any other American. But they tend to be an invisible majority of pagans. So while a few such cases gain publicity, there's an entire level of unreported narratives of persecution that dehumanizes the victims, undermines their place in the communities that they've been part of for years, and sometimes even their own families shun them. And of course, there's also the physical intimidation part. So this fear and anxiety causes many pagans to keep their faith secret from their friends and co-workers, not sharing it openly. So others who are persecuted tend to just move on with life without even reporting it. For instance, there was a case again in Pennsylvania where some neighbors walked onto this pagan's property and tore down some pagan markers on his house. And he didn't even report that to police. This just came out in a survey, that's some academic survey. He said, I didn't report it to police because it seemed like too small a crime to report to police. But he says, the alienation that I felt in the community after that crime, none of the neighbors came out in support of him. He said that's going to live with me for a long time. The other reason is that, say, for instance, a racially motivated crime. So an African American can't, there's no way he can guard himself against the conjectures of a racist because he is visibly and clearly African American. But a pagan, a white pagan, he has the ability to blend in and remain under the radar of anyone with strong prejudices against his pagan faith. And so that seems to be the easy way out for a lot of pagans. They just sort of keep their faith, they kind of tuck it away in a secret place, and kind of compartmentalize it. So they're not presenting a clear, visible image of the pagan population to the community at large. And so the secrecy and the compartmentalization, it cements that feedback loop of ignorance and of concurrent substitution. The ignorance of the larger community. So a large number of non-pagan Americans, the misconceptions they carry about paganism is not because of any malified intention. It's just they don't know what paganism really is about. And if pagans were to come forward and tell them that, look, this is what we believe, this is who we are, our faith is open, you can come and see our lifestyle, a vast majority of Americans are likely to respond very positively. However, that is not being done by the pagan community. So the vast majority of non-pagan Americans, they live in ignorance of what paganism really is. And the only information they get about paganism is either through popular stereotypes about them, or through other forms of symbolic annihilation, either through Abrahamic religion or through pop culture.
Carl, can you sum up, please?
Yes, just give me another 2-3 minutes. So this is important because cultural anthropologists, they point out that the interactive process is as important as all these semantic connections and the regularities that play out. And so based on this limited visibility alone, according to recent Pew Research on the religious landscape in the US, paganism makes about 0.4%, but that's still over 1 million people. And this number itself is going to be much less than the actual number of people who report themselves as pagan. The second point is that there's a lack of social organization amongst pagans in the United States. And so they remain invisible. One of the reasons is that the pagan religion is a solitary religion. People tend to just practice as individuals. A lot of the rituals they perform just at home. They don't really need to have a congregation or priest to do that. And so it sort of again remains under the radar. There isn't a congregational center. There aren't their own established places of worship. However, 40% of the pagan population does occasionally engage in group worship. That's a significant figure to keep in mind. The other thing is that, like I said, there aren't established churches. So there's the Harvard University had a pluralism project in which they said that there are only about 100 pagan temples in the United States. Again, that seems to be an underreported figure, but clearly the pagan centers that do exist, they don't advertise themselves as such, and they're not clearly identifiable to a non-pagan. That's another reason why they kind of remain underrepresented. A 2016 survey found that a lot of pagans do wish that they could be open about their faith, that they could connect openly with other pagans, but also with non-pagan community. They could tell them about themselves. However, a majority of them seemed very comfortable with secrecy and didn't want to go through the hassle of having to educate others about their faith. Now, this is an important point I guess I would want to make here, is that this invisibility is also another reason why Western paganism is unable to connect with natural sibling faith traditions like Shintoism, Hinduism, and other Eastern-based dharma-based religions, and they haven't formed a common community of sorts. And this could go a long way in fighting for their rights and representing themselves positively in society. Just a little bit about history, quickly in a couple of sentences. 1980 to 1995 was a period when self-described pagans started to reach out and write books addressed to the non-pagan community, defining who they are and telling them about themselves. 1995 to 2005 was there was some amount of consolidation and community formation happening, but again, a lot of that was centered around celebration of pagan festivals rather than meeting on a regular basis, just celebration of pagan festivals. But also there were some social occasions such as the Pagan Pride festivals that were celebrated in a few cities like Pittsburgh and so forth. So during those meetings, one of the common points of discussion among pagans was, again, the discrimination they face, the harassment that they face, and whether or not to keep their faith a secret. And most of the time the answer was yes, let's just keep it a secret. I'll end with this one thesis written by Carol Barnaberry. In 2005, she had a publication, Contemporary Paganism, on contemporary paganism. And she said that majoritarian monocentric communities tend to function in a way that the creation of minorities is inevitable, because that one size fits all isn't actually going to work. There's going to be some who fit that size and others who just don't fit in. And so what happens is that often you'll have a stream of people in such societies who hark to the spiritual processes and practices, more individualized spiritual practices of these older ancient pagan traditions. And so the typical reaction of these majoritarian communities is that they either subsume that runoff, such as like Sufism in Islam, or some mystical sects within Christianity. And Elder Elizabeth Arujo, she talked about yoga in the United States and its misappropriation. First yoga was characterized as satanic. Then they said, well, you can do yoga, but just don't call it the lotus posture. Call it, crisscross applesauce. And now you have Christian yoga, a rebranded Christian yoga that is even taught in Christian seminaries here in the United States. So that's one reaction. The other is the constant demonization of the root tradition that it comes from. So even though I'll take yoga, I'm gonna start calling Hinduism as being all about caste and cows and superstition and things like that. So these two tend to go hand in hand, and that's sort of happening with paganism also as part of this New Age movement. So one of the things that she points out, and I'll end with this point, is that she goes into the legal basis of the discrimination against pagan faith traditions. An interesting example that recently came to my attention was in Ohio. There was an application for a permit to build a Hindu temple, and they wanted to build it in a traditional way with, a tall spire, the Hindu shikhara of a Hindu temple. Usually in North America, the Hindu temples, either they're not built traditionally or they have these stubby little spires. And so they wanted to build a regular, with the regular proportions. And they ran into trouble because someone in the local community came up with a signature campaign against them building a temple, or if they had to build a temple, it had to have a very short spire so that it wasn't visible from the roadside or anything else. And they had to go through a lot of a long legal process, a deposition in front of the city council. I wrote a paper on the sacred geometry of the Hindu temple and so forth. And ultimately, they did get the permit. However, they also found during this case that just a few years ago, a church was built in the same community with a spire that is 25 feet higher than what this Hindu temple is building. And there was no signature campaign. They didn't have to justify the height of their church based on sacred geometry or anything. So that's just an example of the legal hurdles that are used to sort of persecute pagan faith traditions. And that includes not just the paganism, European-based paganism, but also Hinduism and other cultures over here. So I'll end with that. And I think the basic takeaway from this is that I think pagans of all traditions in the United States, and polycentric traditions of all traditions in the United States should be more open. It should take the trouble to educate non-pagans about their faith. And I think they'll find that there's going to be a positive response for the most part. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Carl. We seem to be running out of time. We have one more speaker. Our last speaker is Professor Yeshuan Pathak. Professor Pathak is the member of the Board of Directors of the ICHRRF. He has a PhD in pharmaceutical technology and an executive MBA and MS in conflict management. He is Professor and Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at College of Pharmacy, University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. He has more than 200 publications. These are scientific publications, 3 US patents and 2 pending patent applications. He has edited 35 plus books. He has traveled in 80 countries and lectured in more than 100 universities around the world. He has received awards such as Fulbright Fellowships, Outstanding Faculty Award at USF, and Global Engagement Achievement Award from the USF. He has received awards from Australia, Brazil, UK, New Zealand, Ecuador, Trinidad, Tobago, India, and China. He has been volunteering his time despite such a busy professional schedule and achievement for more than 30 years in various non-profit organizations, including International Center for Ethno-Religious Mediation, Oberoi Foundation for Religious Studies, Research Institute for World Ancient Traditions and Cultural Heritage, International Center for Cultural Studies, and he is the pioneering spirit behind the ICHRRF. And I'm really thankful to him for his guidance and support and, inspiration all the time. Professor Pathak, please. Is Professor Pathak there?
You have to unmute me.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thank you for unmuting me so quickly. It's almost 12 and let me wish all of you good morning and good evening because some of us are from different countries. And first of all, I would like to congratulate ICHRRF for hosting such a wonderful seminar, and participants from many different countries are online. It is a great achievement for ICHRRF also. And then I had heard few of the talks which were very inspiring, and then the last talk which Carl has given was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to him. Let me give some background because my first interaction really happened in 1993 when I first visited Africa, and I had opportunity to meet a lot of African elders. And I would like to mention one very wonderful person. His name was Ruben Thuku. Ruben was blind by birth, but then he was an expert in the Kikuyu African traditions, as well as he has studied the Hindu scriptures so well. And we used to have discussion. And my first mentor in this area, understanding the traditions, I would like to make it very clear that I am going to use the word called ancient traditions, because the concept of indigenous came only when the invaders entered into all these countries. You know, our sister Elizabeth Arujo is here. She has been in Guatemala. Her people, Mayan people, have been owning Guatemala for thousands of years, and they had built huge temples. They were owners of the Guatemala, and the invaders started calling them indigenous. That is a wrong conception, which I think we need to really worry about and think about whether we should use this or not. Because if you look at our another great person who is here online, Inija Trinkunian, Inija belonged to Roma tradition. Roma tradition fought for 400 years and prevented any possibility of converting the Roman people to Christianity. And once it so happened, unfortunately, that when majority of them got converted, they started calling Roma people as indigenous tradition. That's not true. They are the owners of Lithuania. These people all over the world, if you go to Australia, Australian Aboriginals are the owner of Australia. If you go to New Zealand, they are the Maori people are the owner of the New Zealand. If you look at African countries, all those great traditions, Kikuyu, Masai, Xhosa, Zulu, Yoruba, Asante, Igbo, all of them are ancient traditions. They had their own nation there. Unfortunately, the invaders, who were very cruel, and I don't want to repeat, a lot of things have been said by Carl, and It has been a history, it is a bloody history, and they twisted the history. You know, I want to share with you, Ethiopian kings have defeated the French army not once or twice. They defeated the French army 13 times. And then the smart or a cheater French general came, and I should call him as a cheater. He cannot be smart because he cheated and he wrote two different kinds of agreements, one in French, other in Ethiopian language. In French language, he said that the next king will be protected by the French government. And in the Ethiopian language, the agreement said that Ethiopian king will keep its sovereignty there. Now you can understand this is cheating. This is cheating. It is historical cheating. And this is what has happened. So I think all over the world, if you look at any part of the world, wherever there were no invaders, things were very calm, quiet, and I would like to bring forth certain commonalities in all these people. I just want to point out, I am a scientist by profession, and I would like to say what happened was when, and I want to share you with a joke. You know, I need to share with you one joke. You know, it always happens in everybody's house. When there is a child born, the child starts walking. And one fine morning, it finds out that when you push the knob down, the flash comes out in the toilet. And suddenly the baby comes out, I found it, I found it, I did that. You know, people who never ever had interacted with Mayan people, who never had interacted with Hindu people, who never had interacted with Maoris, who never have seen the development which was there in Ghana. When the Europeans first time when they went to Ghana, the African country, they found out that Ghana was much ahead as far as the technology is concerned, as far as the development is concerned, as far as the culture is concerned. And then they started finding out how to demoralize these people, and they started calling, if you don't follow Christianity, then you are a pagan. How a person will be pagan? He is following his own religion. I am not a pagan, I am a proud Hindu. And that pride has to be built in the minds of all the people around the world who are nations by themselves. And that is where the Mayan nation, the Roma nation, the Ramawa nation, the Maori nation, all this pride has to be built within these communities. And I think when I first read the book, which was written by John Beatty, that book was talking about African traditions and religions. And when I started reading that in 1993, I was thinking as if I am reading something which is like a Hindu scripture. There were so many commonalities within the African traditions and the Hindu tradition. And gradually, when I started reading about the pagan tradition, the European non-Christian tradition, not pagan but non-Christian tradition, you come to the Maori people, you come to all these people had so many wonderful commonalities. First thing which I always appreciated and accepted, and it is a first and the greatest thing which all these ancient traditions had, no gender bias in the concept of God. All these people had gods and goddesses. There was no gender bias. It is not the monopoly of a man to become the god. The female goddesses were existing in all the ancient traditions around the world. That is the greatness of all the ancient traditions. And I'm not going to call them indigenous traditions. My apologies for that. But not only this female existence of the goddesses, but there was a very strong relationship which was established within the God and the human being. And I will give you a very simple example. In Africa, no African person will go empty-handed to the prayers. He always carries kola nut, might carry a bottle of wine, or carry a uh, some hen, and he will offer those things to the God. It is not simply bribing, but it is a human relationship with the God. And that's why all over the ancient traditions, you will find that there was a direct connection between the human being and the God. There was a direct connection between the human being and God. And I will repeat this with a statement. I will give you a story. Elizabeth Arujo knows very well. There is a great saint. I will call him the saint because he is a great saint, elder of Mayan traditions, Papa Alejandro Oxales Cirilo Perez. And we were sitting right in the Guatemala in Mayan temple. And me and Alejandro and my wife, we were sitting together, we were talking about it. And I asked Alejandro, how the hell you could build such a huge temple? In those days when there were no cranes, I am a scientist, I don't believe this was a human thing. He said, look, you will not understand what I'm saying. I said, please tell me. He said, you are an educated person, you have a PhD, your knowledge might be, very high, but wisdom zero. And he was teasing me. He was really teasing me for a while. And then Alejandro told me that, my forefathers, they were so spiritual. They were so strong in their spirituality that they could lift these big stones with their eyes and put it on the temple. And I said, wow, this is incredible. And I immediately shared the story of Sant Jnaneshwar from Maharashtra, and where the Sant Jnaneshwar and his three brothers and one sister sat on a wall, and there was another saint who was coming. So Saint Jnaneshwar told the wall, let us go and welcome him. And the wall went into the air and then welcomed the another saint which was visiting them. I can believe this because this type of spirituality comes with humanity. And I would like to share one more experience which I had with another African tradition. I was in Guyana meeting a African elder, and we had a good prayers. We sang the song, we did some small dancing because Africans minus dance is zero. And they love dancing. If you travel in bus in Africa, you'll find that half of the people never stand on 2 feet. They will always be dancing with the music, and all buses have loud music, many a times loud Hindi music also. So anyway, since African elder we were talking, and at that time ICCS was planning to organize a conference with a theme called Spirituality Beyond Religions. And I asked our brother elder, sir, what do you think about this theme? Do you think we should do this for ICCS? Without blinking his eyes, this brother had never gone to any education. So he had a natural ability to accumulate wisdom. We lose that ability to accumulate wisdom by going to schools and getting our PhDs. I'm very honest about that. But anyway, so he pointed out to his wife who was on hammock and said, she was reading the Bible. He said, books came much later. Spirituality came with humanity. And that is what ancient traditions believe in the world. All the Mayans, Romas, Ramavas, you take any ancient tradition, all these Native Americans, Africans, Maoris, all of them believe in spirituality which is beyond religions. And that is where the problem is coming, because the Abrahamic religions do not understand spirituality. They have a problem because they don't consider that soul exists, mind exists. They think that women have no soul, women have no existence. All these things are funny. And when they don't understand the philosophy of all the ancient traditions, they call them pagan, they call them animists, they call them heathens. And this is where we, as an ancient tradition people, have to join hands together. And I really like what Carl has mentioned. We have to come together and stand up for our own rights. We are all, in a way, believe in one God, but we appreciate the things which are given to us. Fire is considered to be sacred in all the traditions. In one of our ICHRRF conference, we had 6 different traditions from 5 different continents doing performing their fire worship. Romans were there doing their fire worship. Elizabeth was there, she was doing Mayan fire worship. We had people who were doing, Hindus were doing their Havan. So fire worship is the first thing which really these traditions realize that without the fire we cannot do anything, and that's why fire became the center of humanity, human life. Then came the water. Water became center of human life. And like that, we started creating our own gods and goddesses, building up our own polycentricity, because we know that human being cannot, in order to understand and go to closer to the God, you need to go through different stages of life. You don't need any mediator in between. And we always believe direct relationship with God. We always believe that everybody can reach the God by whichever way they want to reach the God. And that is why if you go to, I had been to Suriname. I went to a Amazon jungle where I visited a village called Bigi Poika, stayed with them in Native American. And the practices they were doing were so similar to the Indian practices. And finally, I would like to share my best statement, which is expressed in different ways by all the ancient traditions, and I want to specifically say all the pre-Christian ancient traditions around the world, which includes Aboriginals, Australian, Maoris, our Romuwas, Ramawas, Asatrus, our Native American brothers and families. All of them believe in one thing, and which I want to share, that it was a Native American saying, and the Native American elder says, if you want to talk to God, it is very easy. You don't need a mediator. Go to a secluded place and meditate. A time comes when you understand the music of the water flowing through the streams, when you understand the language of the birds, they are talking with each other, when you understand the music of the breeze flowing through the woods. And then the Native American elder says, the best way to talk to God is to keep yourself mum. The moment you start talking, God stops talking. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. My time was 12 minutes. My apologies. I went little further, but I hope Dr. Adityan will not use his cane to stop me here. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you, Professor Pathak, for such a wise message to all of us. We humbly corrected. I think we are in an era of political correctness, and I take the point that we should not use the word indigenous and we should use the word ancient traditions, because that does make a very poignant statement about the actual history, that these ancient traditions were there till barbarians came to destroy. So that is a very, very touchy and very important, but very objective point that we need to start incorporating in our day-to-day civil discourse to recognize the history as it is, that these were the ancient traditions that were existing. So we have a couple of questions. The first question, although it has been kind of answered, but I will still, for sake of this thing, repeat it. The question is from Professor Madan Goyal to Elder Elizabeth. And the question says, many years ago, Mr. Chamanlal wrote a book showing how the deep relationship between Hindus and the Mayans were. Are you familiar with that book? And any comments, Elder Elizabeth? Please unmute yourself, ma'am. Elder Elizabeth, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. What I understood is the similarities between the Mayans and the Hindus?
Yes.
Okay. According to the elders, by the oral tradition, they say that first of all, that we came from the same place, and or better say that we had the same first teachers that came, that they were sent by our Creator, because people, they were already here, but they didn't know much about themselves, and they were always asking, you know, that they wanted to know their origin and what are they here for, what to do here, what was their mission. And then Creator sent them the four Balameb, we call them, which were the prophets who came from the Pleiades to teach the tradition. When they came to Guatemala, and we don't know to what place they went first, but when they arrived in Guatemala, the people were called May or Atlantis. And then they started teaching the calendars and teaching just everything, developing the whole culture. And when they felt that it was done, we don't know how many years, how much time they were here, but when they were done, they called the people, and it was like they gathered in a mountain here, and they said, you know, our time is up. We have taught you everything we have to teach, and now we are going back. He says, teach that to your children and to the children of your children and the future generations. And then they went back, and there is a glyph about this showing where the truck coming down and going back. And then they returned one more time, and they came to the area around Egypt. And they developed the culture. They start teaching everything and building temples. And when they finished teaching, the same thing happened, and they went back to the stars. And they were called Karamayas. When they returned a third time, they came to India, and they called the people Nagamayas. And again, they taught the culture, and they returned, and they came a fourth time around the area of Cambodia, somewhere around there. So all these cultures, they have the same, lot of similarities. For instance, we all work with the fire. We have as a symbol of great importance or a sacred thing is the serpent. Like we have the Egyptians had the coral snake, which is the symbol of the medicine. We have around China, they have the 7-headed serpent. And we have also the rattlesnake, which is a very medicinal being. And so we have a lot of similarities in this, because we have the same, we had the same teachers that they were sent, or the knowledge, let's say, that it was, they came from from the higher source.
Thank you, Elder Elizabeth, for your explanation. We are running way out of time, so I will just take one more question and then close the meeting. The question is for Professor Edward Butler, and the question is, does Judaism, the root of Abrahamic religions, qualify as a polycentric indigenous tradition, at least pre-Moses? If not, what change? Professor Butler, please. Is Professor Butler there?
Yes, I just needed to. I needed to wait for the prompt to be unmuted.
Okay.
You can hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
I think that in many ways, Judaism is like many other indigenous traditions in the sense that um, it it simply it has its God, and I think that um, monotheism really becomes problematic with Christianity, and the first, you could say that the first indigenous tradition that Christianity attacked was Judaism, by appropriating for itself this tradition and saying that it was actually in possession of the truth about this tradition, rather than the people who had always been practicing it. And I mean, there's a separate question with respect to the early history of Judaism where other deities were worshipped, goddesses, other gods were present in the matrix out of which it emerged, and perhaps only after a historical process of many centuries did it emerge as an exclusive a tradition exclusively worshiping one god. But that's really a separate question. In many ways, monotheism begins with the supersession of Judaism by Christianity and the attempt to establish a universal template for conversion that would be imposed then upon other peoples.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Butler, for clarifying the situation. It's very interesting that there is no conversion, there's no, conversion to Judaism. You are born from the womb of a Judaic mother, then you are a Jew. Otherwise, conversion is very rare in Judaism, unlike the others, Abrahamic religion. So thanks for clarification. We are way above the time. So with that, I am going to close this meeting. I thank our distinguished speakers who have taken time on a Saturday morning from their busy schedules, but it has been very educative, very enlightening symposium, very educational. I also thank our audience who have taken like big chunk of their Saturday morning from wherever they have joined. As we said, we are recording this session. It will be available on the ICHRRF website, also on our YouTube channel. We hope to convene more such meetings. And once the COVID is fully controlled, we aim to have a live conference of ICHRRF sometimes next year. So with that, I close this symposium on indigenous traditions and polycentric worldview. My thanks to everyone again. Namaskar, and we shall meet again. Thank you very much.